Hello, my name is Justin Bright, and welcome to Kerbal Space Program version 1.8.1 in my next small step RP-1 career mode playthrough. And here we are, looking at Mars, and there can only be one reason for that, and it is the arrival of the Mars Exploration System, which should be just arriving in about 5 more days. So just fantastic, super duper excited. So yeah, everything seems to be going well so far. I'm kind of booting up the systems and taking a look and making sure that everything is working properly. Looks like the answer is not really so far. But I think a big part of that is the avionics that are on, maybe, question mark. Yeah, so, I mean, not much I can do about it at this point, so I'm just going to have to hope that that was all correct, and we will see how it goes. But yeah, we should be arriving here very, very soon, so let's go ahead and look towards our target. See, there it is right there. That little dot right there is the one that we are now hurtling towards. And you can see from our orbit, we are going properly into a prograde orbit. We are not targeting retrograde. I did fix this after it was called out to me in the comments a couple of times, so thank you very much for doing that and alerting me to the mistake I was getting ready to make. But that is not going to be a problem. You can see we are now targeting an orbit that we can get into that will be pretty darn close to the orbits of the other moons and so forth. So what I'm going to do is you can see that we have the rover site alpha location is rotating underneath us here. It's not going to be something that we're going to automatically get into the orbit of, but it's something that we will be able to do relatively easily, syncing up that with our target orbit. So that's something that I'm planning on fixing. I don't think I'm going to get into like this kind of orbit, but I just want to make sure that I'm going to be able to incline my orbit slightly so that we touch this location every so often so that we have the chance to drop off our rover there. Because yeah, we have a lot to do with the Mars exploration system. We have, like we went through all this, but we have communications, which I'm just super excited about, and then we have the big lander, the lander system. The probe that is going to be going to Deimos and Phobos are heading there separately, but there is plenty to do here. So I'm just accelerating a bit. We got the timer open. We can see that it's about 4.5 days away. We can look towards the target and watch Mars approach. You can see the little dot being enhanced by distant object enhancement, coming more and more into focus as we approach. So yeah, as I record this in the middle of February 2021, we are about a couple days away, just 2 days away from the Perseverance lander coming to Mars, which is just so exciting, and I cannot wait to watch myself. I'm going to be watching that live as much as I possibly can. Yeah, it's going to be quite a bit different of a landing compared to what we are doing here, because we are in fact using a we're sort of kind of using a sky crane with this big RCS and that whole thing happening here. But yeah, the way that Perseverance is going to land very similar to the way that Curiosity did, where it has a sky crane that is going to drop it down. It's all connected up underneath a heat shield shell that will then separate, and then it will descend into the atmosphere, use the retro rockets to slow itself down, and then drop off the rover gently on the surface, hopefully, fingers crossed. It's funny to say all that because I'm recording this before the landing, but you all will probably know what is happening before I do, because, or at least as of the time of this recording coming live, because yeah, this is going to be coming out after that happens. All right, so we are rotating around, preparing to target our incoming orbit, where we are just going to be slowing down. The plan is to do this in stages. I am going to insert into the orbit and leave us a generously high apoarian, and that is going to allow us to change our inclination a little bit easier because we do want to adjust slightly. I want to get a little bit closer to equatorial or something, I think. because we want to be, we don't necessarily need to be in any kind of orbit of the moons or anything else, but we do want to be a little bit closer to equatorial for purposes of our, what do you call it, of our geostationary or Mars stationary ComSat network that we will be dropping off from here. And actually, while I'm at it, this is pretty darn close to the resonant orbit that we're going to be using for said ComSat network, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't go ahead and just do that first, because that's, you know, just kind of step on the way. Then we can set up that resonant orbit first, then we will go ahead and what do you call it? Then we can go ahead and do the rest of our mission and drop off the lander and that whole thing. There's I guess there's pros and cons to doing it in either direction. I think it might be better to get into the proper orbit now, or I'm sorry, not the proper orbit, to get into this orbit now, and then drop off the lander, and then I can insert these satellites into orbit so that I'm not wasting and duplicating my efforts. Because that's going to give me a low para-Arian and a proper apa-Arian, which I will need for 2 different parts of my mission. So, yeah, complicated stuff trying to manage all these things, and I'm probably screwing it up as we speak, but this is kind of what sounds right to me for now, so let's go ahead and plan for this. So, 14 hours and 7 minutes until this burn. And so there it is. Mars coming close. I am going in and turning on any science that we have available, which is exactly nothing. We have no new science of any kind. I definitely did not bring any extras because we were a little bit early to get all the new science, but that's fine. We can just execute next node as we come on in towards the planet. Visiting Mars once again. We can see that spinning red planet there. Oh, fantastic. Yes, I love it. I absolutely adore this. So yeah, here we go. We are coming on in, and we will be firing up these 4 KTDU 425A engines, which I really enjoy. As I've mentioned, they're very efficient, nice little Aerozine NTO engine, or UDMH NTO engines that have a lot of ignitions and good specific impulse. So now we have fired up that thruster, and we are on our way, hopefully, into a proper orbit of Mars with the Mars Exploration System. 30 tons of equipment coming in to insert around the red planet. So yeah, as we're burning in, I'm just trying to think through all the different missions that we have here. So I'm trying to do everything I can to conserve fuel on our return stage, because it is indeed a return stage. We will be sending this back to Earth after this mission is complete, hopefully with a sample retrieved by the lander that is hidden inside this shroud. But we have to drop off all sorts of stuff. So my thinking is that we get into the minimum viable orbit here, where we have a very high apa-Arian and a low para-Arian, and that is going to be something that we can use to drop off our lander. After we have dropped off our lander, we will have shed a huge amount of weight, and it will be much easier for us to use the engines to get into the proper orbit to drop off our satellites. Once I have dropped off the satellites and this little construction mast, then we will be... actually, no, I will not be dropping off this construction mast. Do not let me forget that. Because this has the docking port that we are going to be using to get the sample later on. But anyways, we're going to have just this docking mast and this return capsule stuff, and that is going to wait in orbit for the sample return capsule to rise up from the surface to rendezvous with this vessel. We have just now entered into the orbit of Mars, and we are reducing our apa-Arian as we speak and bringing that on down. You can see it's still 150 or so meters per second to bring it down to this point. But that should be just fine. I just don't want it to be so many days. Let's actually abort. call this good. Because we don't need to be very much closer. If I want to press in further, that is fine, but I'm pretty sure that this system is going to be a little bit robust about the difference between 4,600 and like 4,000 or whatever. Let's see, what would this actually take to get all the way down? Okay, getting into a circular orbit is about 1,300 meters per second, which I think is actually very significant. So I may need to burn this to insert into the low orbit before I drop this off, but we're going to have to see about that because I still want to, I have two things to do first. I want to adjust my inclination, and I also need to adjust my, just my inclination for now, because we still need to drop this off at rover site Alpha, which I don't think is going to be very convenient for us to get to. So that is something that I'm going to need to figure out, as well as getting into the orbit for our geostationary ComSat network, because we still want this return vehicle to be in the right place to, return, right? And we could get into a 0-degree inclination, but it actually doesn't really matter. It's not actually important for us to be at a 0-degree inclination. I could just match the plane of Phobos and call that good. But the actual synchronous orbit altitude that they are going to be orbiting at, what is geostationary for Mars, is about 17-ish million meters. Yep. 17,051,877 according to that calculator at Meyer-Webb, which is here-ish, roughly. Also known as far enough away from Deimos and Phobos that it is not going to be a problem. But it is also going to be on the inside of Deimos's orbit, which I think is kind of interesting. But I'm not sure I don't think that's going to be a problem. Be perfectly honest. I think 100% satellite coverage of Deimos is not something that is gonna stress me out. All right, so I have spent a little bit of time in the lab, or in mission control, I should say, doing some testing about what the heck I'm going to do with my current situation, because I don't want to just kind of guess and then flub and throw this whole mission away. That would be incredibly silly, and I think that's it's worth a little bit more to you guys to actually see something worthwhile that I've thought through, as opposed to just kind of doing the first thing that comes to mind and then maybe failing and having to wait another whole bunch of time to send this mission again. So what I think I'm gonna do, and my thought process behind it, is I'm going to separate the lander and rover structure, and I am then going to have the two different ships operating independently. Because currently, we are in a highly elliptical orbit around Mars, just basically in kind of a janky orbit, not really in the same plane as anything else, not a useful or particularly interesting orbit, but it's one that's very high, and that allows us to change our inclination relative to Mars very cheaply. That said, we have a couple different things that we're trying to do with each of these pieces of the mission architecture. So this piece here has 3 individual bits. So we have the lander bit, which is going to be this modular tank, the RCS up here, the big lander engine, and then the soil sampler scoop. Inside, we have a ascent vehicle that in theory should be able to get back up into orbit and rendezvous with this piece here. We also have the rover on top, which is going to use this RCS as a little bit of a sky crane to hop off of the landed lander, and that should allow it to just drive off and do a bunch of science and whatever. Unfortunately, I found that Bon Voyage still does not work as far as I understand it. That's not Voyage. Because it doesn't read the power modules of Kerbalism's RTGs. For Kerbalism and RP-0, the RTGs read as producing 0 power, which makes it super not very useful. So that's unusable. So I'm going to want to do what I can to get as close as possible to our target. We have, so that's this bit here. And those are the constraints that is under. We also have this bit here, which has a couple different functions itself. So first, we want to drop off these individual satellites to be the communications network around Mars. And they have a little bit of fuel individually, and that's something that I should probably check and see how much fuel each of those has, so I know what kind of leeway I have as I am accomplishing this. But that they need to get dropped off, and we are relatively close to the orbit that we need to be in. It is at like 26 million meters, something like that. That is the resonant orbit for a perfectly geosynchronous orbit around Mars. And there's no reason that it needs to be equatorial, right? Like, we could spend a little bit of delta V, about 150 or so, at this altitude, making the orbit equatorial, but there's no particular reason to do that as far as I understand it. And I kind of like the idea of having it be in the plane of either Phobos or Deimos. I think Phobos is the closer of the two, and that will be that'll be lovely. That will be useful for going to, well, it won't be useful at all for the communication satellites. So it will not have any positive or negative utility. As I understand it, we should, in theory, have full coverage of Mars. But the other thing that we have on here is we have this return capsule. So this tiny little bit right here, we have the avionics, decoupler, parachute, heat shield, and that is intended to come back from this journey and return back to Earth with a sample that is launched up by this ascent vehicle inside here. I'm going to want to put this chonker into an orbit that is relatively low, very low, really. Like, after we drop off these satellites, we're going to want to get as low and close to Mars as possible. And in an orbit with an inclination that is high enough that it is going to cross over the location of this rover site. And that is the trick to everything, is we want to put everything into lovely orbits, but this is in a very inclined position in a high latitude on Mars, and so that makes it a little bit more challenging to get to from equatorial or wherever else, and that is also going to mean that we are going to need to be in a relatively tricky orbit to return back home, as opposed to one that is completely perfectly equatorial, which is the optimum mathematical scenario for returning back from another planet. So those are all the things that are going into this decision, and how much fuel I have for each of these legs of the journey is a big part of that. One of the things that I forgot is that this doesn't actually have as much fuel as I thought, because it's cross-feeding from inside, and yeah, see, that went down pretty dramatically. It was cross-feeding from inside and was using the fuel from stages that it was definitely not meant to use, so we're going to have to fix that once we couple. So those are the facts on the ground, or in orbit, as I should say. And so what I think I'm going to do is I am going to disconnect this spacecraft, these two, and separate them. And I'm going to put this lander onto a trajectory, because we have such a high apiarian that we can just use RCS to lower our para-arian to a place where we are going to be able to do an aerobrake pass. And that should help us shed a couple hundred meters per second of delta V, which is going to be helpful because we are going a little bit faster than my original planned simulations for this lander, which, as you may have noticed, is long and thin and pretty dumb. This is not a good way to build a lander by any stretch of the imagination. So it has a little bit of trouble when you're going in more extreme circumstances than the very gentle 150 kilometer descent to the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it through on an aerobrake pass, and that is going to lower its apiarian and reduce the amount of delta V it needs to shed on subsequent passes. That is also going to make it so that it is a little bit easier for me to deal with later on, and also kind of builds in a bit of a delay so that I can start working on dropping off satellites. And the reason why I want to wait to get rid of this, to drop off these satellites, is because I'm going to need to adjust my orbit, and I'm going to want to adjust my inclination at least a little bit. And it's going to be a lot cheaper to do that when I have this chonker off, because this thing is the vast majority of the weight of this vessel. This had a good amount before, but we burned more than half of that fuel coming into orbit, capturing around Mars. So we're going to want to drop this off, put these satellites relays into orbit, and that is going to give us solid communications, and that is going to open up the amount of places that we can land without like having to hope that we are like just hanging over, like happen to be in the same place as like over the orbit of the place where we need to be, and the rover site Alpha is on the right side of the planet when this orbit is happening, and all of that all at the same time. We don't have to worry about all of that once we get the communications network in place. So focusing on that and making sure that happens first seems like a good plan to me. Then once we've done that, we can get this done whenever. Like there's no like deadline for that, because we're not like burdened. This is not burdened by the delta V of moving this thing around, so we don't have to worry about that too much, and we can do the other parts of our mission and prepare the landing as kind of the big grand finale, which is what it should be. So yeah, that is what I'm thinking. That is what I think we're going to do going forward. So let's get started. The first thing is we are going to wait until we get up to the top of this orbit, 46 million meters, really quite high, but that allows us a speed, an orbital velocity at this altitude of 345 meters per second, which is practically nothing. But that means that any tiny change that we make is going to have a very large impact. So start off by undocking, switching back to the original vessel, and just gently pushing away. That's it. All we got to do for that for now. Now, for the lander bit, let's go in and take a look at some of the things that we need to do, and one of them is to flip on the avionics that were buried in here. And this is the avionics of the ascent vehicle is what we use for basically everything, but once again, everything is powered by the RTGs that are buried inside. Okay, so that being done, like I said, an issue that I'd run into when I was playing with this was there's crossfeed, because there needed to be crossfeed, because we had to have, if you remember from my design episode, we had to have crossfeed from this tank all the way up here, so that I could use everything, all the fuel that it needed to man these, or to make these RCS work. So that meant that I could, in theory, burn every bit of fuel because of the nature of Aerozine and NTO. It burns them equally throughout the entire vessel because it is a RCS type fuel. So we are going to push it out of the main tank here, and we are going to lock the other segments. And now you see that instead of the, what was it, like 2,700 that I thought I had so much fuel. Yeah, we had like 4,000 meters per second. I'm like, oh my god, yeah, we can do anything. We can just slow ourselves down. It's just not even a big deal. But no, if you actually limit ourselves to the fuel that we have just in the lander stage, we only have 1,500 meters per second of delta V. And for those actually doing the math at home, we are orbiting close at about 4,000 meters per second, 4,500 meters per second of velocity at that orbital altitude when we get down to our perihelion, which is more than we are going to be able to burn off with this alone. So that is what we have the parachute for. Nope, not that one. The parachute. Then we'll want to take off the fairings, is the docking port, and then everything else is bit here, and then the that part there. So there we go. That is that is the lander. And the way that we are going to do this is we just flip on RCS and rotate around, point ourselves retrograde. The engine is off. Okay, so we are just going to fire on the RCS, start pushing ourselves past our orbiter stage, and you see that our para-Arian is dropping precipitously, which is great. That means we don't have to spend a precious ignition on this, which is one of the big limiting factors that I'm running into with this. What I'm looking for is somewhere between 42 and 46 kilometers of altitude. Too low and we will capture early and it could be disastrous. Too high and we won't get enough of our speed burned off. So there's a bit of a we'll call it, that's a little bit low, but should be fine. I might flip around and raise that a bit. There's a little bit of an art form here in trying to figure this out, because I did test this in a couple different ways, just to try to see how things went, because I changed the scenario that I tested so much. All right, that's probably a little high now, but I'm just not going to stress about it. Okay, I decided to stress about it, so just a little bit more. Okay, there we go, 43.75, perfect. Now we are set up so that we can do a nice aerobrake pass that is going to bring our orbit down quite significantly. If we wanted to make this, like what trajectory, the trajectories mod is planning for us is that we are going to burn off about 400 meters per second of delta V. So that's fantastic. Like that is a great number. That is helping us and spreading that amount of heat and everything else over multiple passes is just fantastic. But we need to be careful, because if we do too many of those, then we are going to wind up re-entering and not have a very controlled landing. So we want to, that's the big trick, is trying to find a way to land exactly where we want to land, because I don't think Bon Voyage is going to work, and if I have a 100-kilometer rover drive, I am going to tear out my hair. All right, so technically we probably could get started with the other thing of getting our ComSat network ready to go, but it's not super necessary for this particular pass, and we're going to want to get this taken care of so we don't have to worry about it, because this is a dangerous thing where we are actually going to be passing through Mars's atmosphere, which is a little too thin to ignore, but too thick to ignore, too thin to be of any real use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pitch us up to about 15 degrees, and this is part of my original plan, but my original plan had us targeting from a 150-kilometer circular orbit, putting our para-Arian down to like 50 to 60 kilometers, and then pitching down to about 10 degrees like this and holding that position. Once it started to re-enter on its own, because the apa-Arian was so low, it would just naturally start to re-enter at that point, and then we could burn the engine to hold up our, our vertical speed to keep that from going too low, and then throw out the parachutes at some point after that while we were coming in, and then that would be kind of how that worked. It uses all three ignitions, and that I have discovered is actually pretty dangerous, because one thing that I forgot is we have not tested this very much. We have only 800 data units on the Lunar Module Descent Engine. I forgot to toggle the extra pre-flight, so that's fantastic. And that means that we have to have three ignitions that work, and they have to like not fail, and that's 6% each time. And like if you punch this into one of those probability calculators and say I have a 94% chance of succeeding at this roll, but you have to do it 3 times in a row, that's only 83% chance that all 3 of those succeed, and that is a number that is not great comparatively. So that's something that I'm really quite worried about, and So long as I get 2 burns, 2 ignitions, I should be able to make this work. But just only having 1 ignition is not doable. But I should be able to scramble and figure it out if one of these burns fails. But thankfully, that is not what is happening now. We are not going to have any burns whatsoever on this particular pass. We are just using the atmosphere itself to make this happen. There we go. I just wanted to look at the numbers, or the pitch and roll amounts here, because that tells me how hard MacJeb is fighting to maintain control and lets me know if I need to ease up on the pitch a bit. Because we are tilted at about a 15-degree pitch to try to present a little bit more. My goodness. And also helps if I don't click on random things. Because we are presenting a little bit more of our surface area to the airstream, and I'm hoping that bounces us up a little bit and helps cut our velocity. And you can see that that's coming down quite a bit. We are re-entering at about 4,500 meters per second of velocity here, and that is not that much slower than the Perseverance rover, which, as I mentioned, when I first started recording this, it was coming up in the next couple days, but it was actually earlier today that Perseverance successfully landed on Mars, which is super exciting. But it came in screaming in straight in from an interstellar trajectory at 5,500 meters per second of I keep trying to say of delta V, but that's not what that is. But it was coming in at 5,500 meters per second relative to Mars. And it just slams into the atmosphere using a proper heat shield. So the fact that I'm doing this without one is not like super duper great. But hopefully, so long as I don't burn off my engine, we should be just fine. But yeah, you can see that we are pushing on our pitch a little bit, but we still have plenty of room to spare. It hasn't completely overheated yet, but it's getting pretty close, and we are 15 seconds away from the para-Aryan of this pass, at which point we will stop descending and begin ascending back up into orbit. And yeah, this is a little bit deeper of a pass than I had perhaps wanted, but I think we should be okay. But yeah, just like with the Perseverance landing here, it's a bit of a terrifying thing. Anytime that you have an interface with the atmosphere, there are so many things that can go wrong, and absolutely everything has to go right for it to be an actual success. You see our RP-1 has dipped down, getting close to 6 million meters, but we are still holding steady. We still have not burned anything off, and we are now rising up again. We are increasing our vertical speed as we ascend up once again towards the top of our orbit, which is, like I said, going to be really pretty darn low, and we have shed something like 500 meters per second, which is better than I had expected. So yeah, like I've said, this is a very suboptimal design. Please do not design your landers long and thin like I have. It is the absolute worst possible way, and I have made my life dramatically harder for having done this compared to making a squat, fat lander. Those are the best ways to do it because they are much more stable just on their own. Yeah, that is what you want in a lander. Gosh, are we gonna make it out of the atmosphere, do you think? Because we're on our way up, so we should be able to make it out. I'm starting to wonder, though. Where is this? Activate navigation. I mean, it wouldn't be terrible if we landed on this pass. Like, it wouldn't be great, but what's burning off? Like, one side of our fairing is burning slightly, but that's fine. 2.5 million meters. Speed is down to 38. But our para-Aryan is now rising, which means that I think that we are relatively safe. Our vertical speed is dropping. All right, I'm going to try and reduce our pitch down to nothing so that we are a little bit more aerodynamic and just cut through, and there we go. You see that has that's allowing our vertical speed to increase and get out of this atmosphere. Because I don't actually want to land on this pass. I want to land in a much more precise fashion so I can actually get really close to the rover location. Nope, it looks like we are in fact going to not make it out of the atmosphere, it looks like. All right, yeah, it's looking like it's going to be just so incredibly close, whether we actually get out of the atmosphere or not. I really did not think this was going to be such a, I guess, successful? I have a hard time saying this was a successful aerobrake if I went down too much, right? All right, it looks like this is about to be the absolute worst case scenario where I skip out of the atmosphere and then come down like way on the wrong side of the planet. So, gosh, what do I even do at this point? Man, I can't believe I failed this catastrophically already. All right, so I guess what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip us around, and I am going to burn in a direction that brings us vaguely closer-ish to our target, because we are 1,400 kilometers away. Ugh, man. Okay. Yeah, it looks like we can add a little bit of normal without increasing the delta V that we're spending like too terribly much. But still, we want to conserve as much as possible, and here we go. We are activating this engine, and we're coming down, I guess. Like, I don't know what else to do at this point but to give this a shot. Because I tested this at like 45, and I thought I had gone as low as this, and it worked out fine. But clearly, that was not the case for this particular set of parameters. Just doing a little bit of physical time warp as we complete this burn. We are still heading up just slightly, but we are getting ready to head back down and into the atmosphere of Mars. All right, that's good enough for me. Okay, so I mean, this is kind of a better situation where we are going to be entering on a relatively gentle trajectory. We are coming down from about 100 kilometers, and we have 6.5 minutes until impact. What I'm doing now is I am tilting us up because we are going to want to... I've used one of my 3 burns to change our trajectory to go a little bit more towards rover site Alpha, but we are still more than 1,000 kilometers away, and we are not going to get like too much closer because we're moving mostly parallel to it. We have let's see, so we can put this up here, toggle the shoot info so we can take a look at that, see that that's deployment is risky. I am able to deploy this parachute at about 1,500 meters per second. Anything higher than 1,500 meters per second, and I have like a 90% or more chance of it just ripping straight off. But below there is when I start having a chance for this to actually work. So as we get down to about 45 kilometers, that is when I am going to start thinking very seriously about turning on my engine and preparing for our final descent, because we have only 1.5 minutes until we re-enter. I have lit up the engine and it has ignited one more time. Fantastic. Not ready to put that on yet. So we are doing this for 2 reasons. So we are pitched at 20 degrees. That presents a bigger face to the airstream, but it also is reducing our vertical speed. because I want to reduce some of our surface horizontal velocity before we come in to touch the ground. Because like I said, if we can get our velocity down to about 1,500 meters per second, then we are going to be able to deploy our parachute, and then we will be mostly okay. We need to save a little bit of our velocity or our fuel for that, so I am just throttling down. But it's really important that we hit that point. So we are doing what we can, and there's two reasons. Let's see this, but not. There we go. Oh no! Oh no! Shoot! This is what I get for looking away. Okay. The other reason, as you can see us, come on, get in there. Oh my God. The other reason is, well, if we flop around too much, then we are going to burn out entirely and get vapor in the feed lines. Oh, we are now flying uncontrolled, and I'm just trying to flop this around. Oh, this is the worst. Oh, come on. I think we're going to fail here. But yeah, we needed that gimbal is the biggest thing. Like this on its own is not aerodynamically stable, and we needed the gimbal in addition to the RCS to actually arrest our rotation. Yep, and that is gonna be just about it. Yep, and those failed on us. So there we go. That is that. That is me failing at this completely. Well, let that be a lesson to me. Long and skinny landers are really, really stupid. And, you know, I could have kept trying and, I could have tried to save scum my way into a possible landing where that had worked, but I think that I'm just going to take the loss on this one, and yeah, that's really unfortunate. All right, so that leaves us with the other half of our mission, the what do you call it? The Mars exploration system, half of which has failed, but we have some parts of this should work just fine. We still have the sample return capsule that should be ready to rock. We have a communication satellite network that we can deploy and will be deploying. And we still have the Martian Moonhopper 2 that is going to be coming and bringing a sample of Deimos and or Phobos to this vessel, which it will also be able to return back to Earth. So I may have failed on the rover portion, but honestly I kind of deserve to because I built that thing so dumb. Long fin landers are bad for all of the reasons that you guys saw there. It was barely controllable and had a very hard time re-entering if anything went wrong. Recovering from disaster is the real issue that it had there. So we are going to deal with that, and I'm probably going to launch something that reminds me a little bit more of Perseverance and Curiosity with the that long, wide, flat biconic capsule that is going to come down and enter into the slam into the atmosphere from a direct trajectory with a back shell and the whole thing. That sounds really cool. I think that's what I'm going to plan to do, is build something that something a little bit more historical, something a little bit more like what NASA has done with all of our latest science and everything else. On one of our big Paladin launchers, probably, because whenever I have big failures on my own designs, it's when I go back to reality and digging into history that I'm able to find success once again. So I think that is where we are going to leave it this time. Next time we will get back to finishing off this part of the mission. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up. We have Martian Moonhopper is going to be here in just 30 more days. We have a Vesta spacecraft that is going to be arriving. Pioneer Jupiter in just the next year, and we have a transfer window to Venus that I have forgotten about, so we don't have anything ready to go for that. I could probably bang something out really quick, but that may or may not. Well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. We'll see what we do with that one, but that is going to do it for us this time. If you enjoyed this episode, please let me know what you think down in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Lament the loss of our badly built rover and lander, and I will see you next time.